I'm Becca, and this is Deadly Truths, where history, horror, and humanity collide. Every episode, we go beyond the headlines and into the hidden corners of American violence, the soldiers, the murderers, the martyrs, and the ghosts that history tried to forget. Some of these stories are old, some are still unfolding, but they all ask the same question: what drives ordinary people to cross the line between duty and destruction? This is Deadly Truths. Before we begin, content warning. The episode includes discussion of combat trauma, PTSD, moral injury, and suicide within the military. If you're a veteran or active duty service member and anything in this story hits too close to home, please don't carry it alone. You can call or text 988 and press 1 to reach the Veterans Crisis Line or chat online at veteranscrisisline.net. If you are active duty, you can also reach Military One Source 24/7 at 1-800-342-9647 or talk to your chaplain, behavioral health team, or command. Getting help is not a weakness. It's the same courage you showed when you put on that uniform. You are not alone, and your story isn't over. Panjshir Way, a rural district southwest of Kandahar, Afghanistan. It's after midnight, the air is cool, the power is out, and families are sleeping under wool blankets in clay brick homes. Somewhere in the dark, an American soldier is walking alone, carrying his rifle, a pistol, and a flashlight. His name is Staff Sergeant Robert Bales, a 38-year-old husband, a father of two, and a decorated combat veteran. That night, Bales left his outpost at Camp Balandi not once but twice. By dawn, 16 Afghan civilians were dead. 9 of them were children. 4 of them were women. The youngest one was only 2 years old. The villagers would later call it the night the Americans came to kill us. And when investigators followed the trail of footprints in the dust, it led straight back to a U.S. base. Before he was the face of one of the worst war crimes in modern U.S. history, Bales was ordinary, born in Norwood, Ohio in 1973, middle-class Catholic family, high school football star, homecoming type. After a failed attempt at finance, he joined the Army in 2001 right after 9/11. He was, by all accounts, a solid soldier. His commanders described him as competent, squared away, reliable under pressure. His record included 4 deployments, 3 to Iraq and 1 to Afghanistan. He'd seen death, lost friends. He also sustained multiple injuries, concussions, a traumatic brain injury, and he had chronic pain. And behind the hero narrative was something darker. There was financial strain, marital stress. There was heavy drinking and years of combat trauma. By 2012, Bales was burned out. He served over 1,000 days in combat zones, the kind of repetition that slowly erodes whatever's left of a person's emotional wiring. The Panjshir Way district was not an easy place to be stationed. It was the birthplace of the Taliban, the heart of the resistance. IEDs lined the roads. Sniper fire was constant. Every mission carried the possibility of death, or worse, an invisible injury to the mind. At Camp Balandi, morale was low. The soldiers lived in small, prefabricated huts surrounded by mud walls. They were short on sleep, always on alert, and watching Afghan villagers by day who could become insurgents by night. Bales had been there only a few months, but his commanding officers noticed the change: irritability, exhaustion, detachment. He was drinking even though alcohol was banned. He lost friends to roadside bombs. He'd been passed over for promotion. The same week as the massacre, a Taliban bomb had blown off the leg of one of his friends. For soldiers like Bales, the line between justice and revenge, that line was thinning. Just after 1 a.m. on March 11, 2012, Bales put on his night gear. He was supposed to stay inside the wire. Instead, he slipped out alone. He walked about a half a mile to Alkozai. There he entered the home of Mohammed Dawood. Inside were 9 people, men, women, and children. Bales opened fire. When it was over, 11 of them were dead. Witnesses later said he dragged bodies into a pile and he set them on fire. Then he returned to base, reloaded, and left again. Around 3 a.m., he crossed into Najiban, another village, entered the home of Haji Mohammed Nahim. He shot and killed 5 more people, a man, his wife, and their 3 children. An Afghan guard saw him coming out, blood on his clothes, weapon in hand. The guard alerted his superiors. When Bales finally turned himself in, his words were chillingly calm. I did it. No one could yet comprehend what it meant. In Afghan culture, entire extended families often live together. Parents, children, cousins, grandparents, everyone under one roof. That's why the impact was so devastating. One survivor, Mohammed Wazir, came home to find 11 relatives dead, including his wife, his mother, and all 6 of his children. That just turns my stomach. He later said, I want justice. What kind of heart does this man have to kill my children? Another, Rafi Ola, was just 11. He described being shot in the leg as his family burned and said he saw an American soldier with a flashlight shooting everyone. These testimonies became the backbone of the trial, evidence that stripped away the idea that it was confusion or combat fog. This was not chaos. It was deliberate. When news broke, the Pentagon scrambled. The headlines read, U.S. soldier killed 16 Afghan civilians. To the Afghan people, it wasn't a single soldier. It was the American army. Protests erupted. Back in the States, the military closed ranks. They moved Bales to Joint Base Lewis McChord in Washington, his home base, and began the formal investigation. Officers described it as an isolated incident, but the truth was it was not isolated. It was the logical endpoint of war fatigue, psychological breakdown in the system that kept sending the same soldiers back over and over again. Psychologists who later examined him described him as a man detached from reality, flooded by guilt, anger, and exhaustion. His defense team painted a portrait of a soldier that had unraveled. PTSD from multiple tours, traumatic brain injury, sleep deprivation, steroid and alcohol use, and deep resentment towards the army that, in his view, had used him up. In his own words, he said, I thought I could be the guy who could put it all aside and just do my job. But the reality is I lost compassion. I stopped feeling. And that's the sentence that sticks. I stopped feeling. The psychic wound that happens when your actions or the actions you witness violate everything you believe about yourself and the world. It's not just trauma. It's self-betrayal. In 2013, Bales faced a general court-martial. He was charged with 16 counts of premeditated murder, 6 counts of attempted murder, and 7 counts of assault. The prosecution sought the death penalty. The defense argued insanity and moral collapse. Ultimately, he pleaded guilty to avoid execution. He said, There's not a good reason in the world for why I did the things I did. During sentencing, the courtroom was silent as Afghan survivors testified by video. Children described watching their parents die. A father showed photos of his burned daughters. The military judge asked Bales if he had anything to say. He replied, I am sorry. I made a terrible mistake. But the word mistake fell flat. 16 civilians were dead. Entire family lines were wiped out. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Today, Robert Bales lives in the United States Disciplinary Barracks at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. He shares the prison with other high-profile military offenders, including Nidal Hassan and the Fort Hood shooter, who I'm going to cover in another episode. Inside Leavenworth, days are regimented, quiet, repetitive, the polar opposite of war. He wakes early, works a job inside the walls, has access to therapy, he writes letters, he sometimes speaks to journalists. In 2015, he told Esquire magazine that he was still trying to understand himself. It's not like something broke one night, he said. It was years of just turning off. He's not eligible for parole and he will likely die there. And maybe that's fitting. because Leavenworth has become in many ways the cemetery of America's unfinished wars. For Afghanistan, the massacre confirmed every fear. The U.S. soldiers saw them not as people but as targets. For the U.S. military, it was a PR nightmare, the kind that damages strategy more than bullets ever could. But for mental health professionals, it was a wake-up call. If a career soldier, trained, decorated, tested, could cross this line, then something inside the system was broken. We've spent decades teaching soldiers how to fight, but not how to come home, not how to carry what they've seen. The military calls it combat stress reaction. Clinicians call it disassociation, but survivors, the ones who commit the acts, often call it nothing at all. Because it's really hard to name something that destroys your own sense of self. PTSD can make you hypervigilant, angry, sleepless. Moral injury makes you hopeless. It's what happens when you can no longer see yourself as a good guy. For Bales, every tour chipped away that identity until there was nothing left but rage. He wasn't an over-the-top political nut job. He wasn't a thrill killer. He was a man whose soul had worn down to the bone. And that doesn't excuse what he did, not for a second, but it does demand that we understand it. Because if we don't, it'll just keep happening. Back home in Lake Tapps, Washington, Bale's wife, Carolyn, was suddenly pariah. Neighbors stopped talking to her. Reporters camped outside her house. She was left to raise 2 children under the shadow of something unspeakable. In her few interviews, she said she never saw signs he was capable of violence. He was gentle with their kids, affectionate and funny. And that's the haunting part. He could be both things at once, the loving father and the man who massacred families in their sleep. War blurs those lines. The military called it isolated, but after Iraq and Afghanistan, how many isolated incidents does it take before it becomes systematic? The wars dragged on so long that trauma became routine, deployments stacked onto deployments, marriages strained, bodies broken. By 2012, 22 veterans a day were dying by suicide. Please think about that. 22 veterans a day dying by suicide. And yet soldiers were still being recycled through combat zones. If war is a factory, then Bales was its defective product, a warning label we ignored until it exploded. If you were to walk through Leavenworth's echoing corridors today, you'd find Bales among roughly 400 inmates, all military. They wear brown uniforms. Their world is 6 acres wide. They attend chapel, exercise, write letters, and age slowly under Kansas skies. The irony isn't lost on anyone. Many of them once guarded prisons overseas. Now they live inside one. For the guards at Leavenworth, the challenge isn't danger, it's monotony. Every day they walk past men who were once heroes. The men remind them that valor and violence sometimes share the same uniform. When you strip away the uniform, what's left is the human cost. Bales will never see freedom again. The Afghan families will never see justice that feels whole, and America will never fully reckon with what it created. Soldiers so conditioned to survive that they forgot how to feel. The massacre wasn't just one man's crime. It was a mirror held up to 20 years of showing us what happens when a nation fights too long and forgets why they're fighting at all. When the war comes home, someone once said, it doesn't knock on the door, it walks in wearing our own flag. We know that on March 11th, 2012, 16 people died. We know that their names are remembered by their families even if the world has moved on. We know that Robert Bales acted alone, but not in a vacuum. We know that war changes people. We know that someone's never show up on scans. Maybe the real lesson isn't about evil or justice. Maybe it's about what happens when empathy collapses. Because before a trigger is pulled, something else breaks first. The part of a person that can see another human being as real. When that's gone, anything is possible. And that's why Leavenworth matters not just as a prison, but as a warning. It's where we send the soldiers who remind us that war doesn't end when the shooting stops. It just changes uniforms. You have been listening to Deadly Truths with Becca. If you found this story compelling, follow, rate, and share on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts. It helps keep these forgotten histories alive. War doesn't always end on the battlefield. Sometimes it follows you home. If you're living with that weight, please reach out. Call or text 988 and press 1 for the Veterans Crisis Line, or reach Military One Source at 1-800-342-9647. The help you'd give a brother or sister in arms is the same help you deserve. You are not forgotten. You are needed. Sources for this episode include the New York Times, BBC, and official U.S. Army court-martial records. You can find all those resources, as usual, in the show notes. Deadly Truth is written and produced independently by me. And remember, the past isn't dead. It's just doing time at Leavenworth. And a super big thank you to everybody who is listening and following and sharing. You guys are awesome.